Hey, good morning. Today's daf is Tzadi, page 90, and we begin on 90A. Um, let's see, where are we? Like two lines from the top, right? Um,
He ended at Vakama hi ukla.
okay, so right at the first line, yeah?
That's who he ended with the word ukla.
Okay. Um, well, V'kamahu uchla is echad michamisha b'reviyah. The uchla that we refer to is one. Okay, so we'll start with V'midas halach, the second line. So we're discussing the measures that are permissible, so as to avoid cheating and or confusion. Ufamidas halach with liquid measures. Hu osehin, v'chatzi hin, ushlishi sahin, u'revi sahin. The four standard measures are one hin, a half, a third, and a quarter. V'log, v'chatzi log, u'revi sushminis, and a log, a half a log, a quarter of a log, and an eighth of a log. The revis that we often refer to in halacha is this revis, um, revis hahin. V'yechad mishmona b'shminis, and also an eighth of an eighth, v'zeu kartov, which is called a kartov. Okay, so these are the ones that the measures you can make, which implies that anything else is not allowed. So now the Gemara is going to question that. V'lavod nami kabayim, what about a two-kav measure, right? Well, why not do that? Why is it listed a three-kav measure, the tarkov, and a half tarkov, which is one and a half? Like, that seems a little odd. Why not have a two-kav measure? So the Gemara says, "Asi luchluch tarkov." Once you have a tarkov, which is a one and a half, then it's similar. It's too similar. A two-kav measure would be too similar, and you could use the wrong one. Unclear if it means by accident or purposefully to cheat someone, because they almost look the same. So Alma. So okay. So we see. So what do we see from this? To inshe tilta. So you can. This implies that it's easy to make a mistake of a third difference. In other words, you have a 1.5 cup measure, which is standard. Right? A third of that is a half. So if you add on 1/3 to make it 1.5 plus a half, which is 2, that's too similar. That could be mistaken, right? Before for the smaller one. So if that's the case, if that's the standard, like if that's the what you if that's what people might make a mistake and therefore you can't make that kind of a new measure. Kav nami lo levit. So in that case, if you have a tarkov measure, then why are you allowed to make a 1 kav measure? It's too close to. It's a third away from a half tarkov, from a 1.5 measure, right? So more answers, Ella kabayim hainu lo levit. So why can't you make a 2 kav measure? Not because you might make a mistake and confuse it with the 1.5 kav measure, but tarkov, because you might confuse it with the 1.5, with the half tarkov, which with the half tarkov, which is smaller by only a quarter than the 2 kav measure. So Alma Tayin Shibarivas. Okay, fine. So what are you saying
If
that?
you what how if you can't make a mistake, if you could make wait a second, if you could make a mistake, if you can't make a mistake between a 1.5 and a 2, then why would you not make a mistake between a half and a 2?
Between 1.5 and a 1 second.
In the end, it's the ati lachalufe b'chatzi tarkov. Isn't that a half? I mean, you can't make a 2. We couldn't make a 1.5. No,
Okay,
we
you
couldn't
can't.
make a 2 because you could confuse it with 1.5, and now you can't confuse. Now you can confuse it with a half.
No, I think the Tarkov is 1.5, right? So first we said, then like why can't you make a 2 kav, which is 1/3 greater than the existing Tarkov, or 1.5, right? And so now we're saying, no, the reason you can't make it is not because you could confuse the 1.5 kav measure with the 2 kav measure, because you could confuse the 1.5 measure with the 1 kav measure. Okay, and by the arithmetic uh, method that we're using, that is a quarter difference, not a third difference.
With a 1 cup, we said with a half Tarkov. But wait, a Tarkov is a half a cup.
No, Tarkov is 1.5. It's half
What?
of a 3 cup, right?
Oh, so
Um,
a half of a Tarkov is 3/4 then, right? Of a cup. Because if it's one and a half,
wait, 1 second. I'm sorry. Did I say that wrong? A Tarkov is 3 cup, and a half Tarkov is 1.5.
okay.
Okay, so um, so I might have said this, maybe I mixed this up when I said it. So the 2 kav we said could be confused with the 3 kav, which is the tarkav, right? And that's a third difference. So we say no. The problem is it might be confused with the 2 kav, which is a quarter difference.
With the two
Okay,
cup. And then we said at the end it could be confused with a half a Tarkov, which is how much? That's
that's 1.5.
one and a
Right. So
half.
the 1.5 might be confused with the 2 kav, but that's only a quarter difference.
Right. I don't know.
Okay.
This is getting okay. All right. This
All
just
right. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry if I confused that. So
it's
I'm going to
it.
tell you in Shuriva. Okay. So fine. So what are you ending up with? It's a quarter that might, if it's a quarter difference, people might make a mistake. Yihache chatzi toman v'uchla l'levid. Then you shouldn't be able to make a chatzi toman. What is that? Half of an eighth of a kav, so 1/16 in a kav, and an uchla, which is a 20th of a kav. The difference between those is less than a quarter. Right, so why can you make both of those? Amar Papa, milos katanas b'kibu and shay. No, you're talking about the difference between, like, cup measures, cup size measures, and teaspoon size measures, right? If you're looking at the smaller quantities, the percentage, or it's there's a different perception of the difference between them. So he's claiming that in smaller measures, we're not so concerned that people will mix them up. People will. Now, I don't know if this is borne out by your experience, but what the Gemara is saying is that people will not so easily mix up a half teaspoon with a teaspoon, say, but they will easily mix up, 2 cups with 1.5 cups. So do with that what you will. I don't know if that is borne out by your personal experience or not.
So he says the people are bakiin bazeh
Yeah,
in this
so
moment.
since people, if the whole problem here is we're
But
afraid that people will either mistakenly or possibly deliberately, use the wrong measure. They intend to use the larger one, they use the smaller one, or vice versa, because visually they look almost the same, so it would be easy to mix up, right?
so we had. Go ahead.
Whereas with the smaller types of measures, like teaspoon size measures, people will be more aware of the difference between similar sizes.
Okay, but the Gemara yesterday said clearly that people are allowed to make only a hin, chetzi hin, and a revi'at hin, and they cannot make smaller measures. The Gemara was very clear on that. And we asked Eli last night. He says, "I don't understand what's going on here. I don't know how they." And maybe this is for liquid, maybe this is solid. He says, "I don't understand now how the Gemara comes to say now we can break this up into smaller measures."
Well, it
Right?
said midas halach, and now we're talking about liquid measures.
Yeah.
Now, why, I mean, it's presumably you're looking at the size of the cup, right? So, like, why it should be different for that or for solid measures, I don't know. But maybe what I'm saying is that there is a need for smaller measurements for liquid, and not so much for solids. Like, you're never going to want to use a teaspoon of flour, but you'll often want to use a teaspoon of oil or vinegar. Okay, when it comes to solids, typically you need larger measures. So having smaller measures doesn't enter into it. Like, what is the purpose of that? But when liquid measures, you do need smaller measures. Now, I'm talking about, like, home cooking, right? Not marketplace buying. Nobody buys a tablespoon of oil in the market, right? I mean, in my mind's eye. So I'm not sure that I'm really answering the question.
Right, but I could see an application in chemistry lab years ago. We used graduated cylinders, and we could measure things to an eighth of a liter, eighth of
Right,
a
but I'm saying that you
milliliter,
wouldn't, but
cubic
you wouldn't.
centimeter. So we were measuring things to very small liquids, not solids.
Right, but you wouldn't go to the lab supply store and say, I need, 2 cc's of whatever, right? That's
No,
ridiculous.
no,
You
but
buy a jug of it and you measure it out at home or in the lab.
correct.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what's going on here. Like I would understand this in terms of home measure because with home measures, there's no issue of cheating. I mean, you might mess up your recipe, right? But there's no issue of cheating. So, I don't know how things were done in the marketplace. Maybe you did buy a very small amount of oil. I don't know.
Some people were poor, people were poorer then.
People were poor. That's right. They went to the market every day. I mean, you don't have to go back very long. My mother-in-law would go, even when she lived in Canada, she would go to the grocery every day and buy fresh food for dinner, right? Whereas my mother would like go to Costco and buy, 30 avocados and it would last as long as it lasted. So, but I think, in older economies and ancient times, clearly the practice, I mean, you didn't have the same storage capabilities, especially when it comes to things that spoil. Um, I don't know, it's hard to understand exactly how things worked. Um, so we're left, even we can try to explain it, but it's really a little beyond our own experience, I think.
Hmm.
Shlishi Sahin v'Ravi Sahin lo levid. You shouldn't make a third of a hin and a quarter hin, according to this, because they could be mixed up, right? What's the difference between a third and a quarter? It's 25%, right? It's so you shouldn't be allowed to do that, and yet the Brisa listed those, right? Shlishis and Ravis. So Gemara says, "Kevin David Mikdash Lagazer Rabban." Okay, we don't want to ban a quarter and third of a hin, because those were measures that were actually used in the Beis Hamikdash, and so you want to make sure that those are measures that are available, right? So even though we have this concern about cheating or about mistakes, we're still going to maintain those two measures because they're needed for the Mikdash. So the Gemara says, "B'mikdash lami ligzar." So, like, okay, so don't use them in the mikdash. Like, instead of having a 1/3, maybe you should have measures of 2 times 1/6 or something like that. There are other ways around it. Like, why just because it's being used in the mikdash do you have to have that specific measure? My answer is Kohanim's reasoning because we allow it in the mikdash because Kohanim are particular. They're more careful than the average person. Okay, so we're fine with them using the 1/3 and the 1/4 and not making a mistake, right? And therefore, we allow it in the marketplace because we don't want to ban those measures. Now, it's not really a very good answer to me because uh, let the Mikdash ban those measures and use more of smaller measures because of the concern of mistakes in the marketplace. But that doesn't seem to be a concern. It seems to be more like we're going to have this in the Mikdash because it's fine. We have no concerns in the Mikdash, and therefore, since we have those measures ready in the Mikdash, that's going to override the concerns we have in the marketplace. Amar Shmuel. You can't increase the sizes of measurements by more than a sixth. What this means is, like, if in one town, they decide, you know what, a liter is now not going to be a liter anymore. It's going to be 110 centiliters or 150 centiliters. That's going to be the new liter, right? Like you do it's more easy to imagine with monetary things, right? Like the new shekel is 100 times more valuable than the old shekel. But you could do that with measurements too, if that's the customary measure in the town. So you can't increase the size of the measure more than 1/6. And the Gemara will explain why. And you can't do this with currency. Same thing. And if you are a trader in these in these commodities, al yistakar yoser mishus. You shouldn't take more than 1/6 profit, which is the classic ona. So now the Gemara will explain. What's this about measurements? Increasing the size of a measurement. My tama, why can't you? If it's because you're worried about that the prices will go up, right? In other words, um, the people might the sellers might raise the prices than the more than the raise in the size of the measure, right? So in that case, shtustamilo, then even 1/6, right? Don't say more than a sixth, but the sixth is okay. But the sixth is not okay. If the question is ona, 1/6 ona is a problem. No, I'm sorry. Afkui Tara is not ona. Take that back. Just a second. Um,
The market prices.
yeah, one second. What's the difference between Afkui Tara and ona? Um, okay. So look at the Rashbam on the widest lines.
Mirim tavua lekan kishayaru sheosifu.
Yeah, Shavim Tual Khan, Kishayiru Shosifu Hamidos Yokiru. Um, uh, when they see that the measures are larger, they'll make them more expensive. Then they'll raise the prices too high. So shtus nami lo le'avid mishum haitama gufe. Then like so okay, this is Afkoi Tara. Afkoi Tara now is like what's the difference raising it a sixth or raising it a tenth, right? If the concern is that the merchants will take advantage of people's unfamiliarity with the new measure and raise the price more than is warranted, then that is a concern whether you raise the price by 1/6 or by 1/10, right? There shouldn't be a limit. And then Mishumana,
What does it mean? Mishum high time gufe.
in
Rashbam.
Rashbam?
Yeah, shetut.
For the same reason, right? Like don't raise the measure even 10% for the same reason, right? That or maybe take them more unfamiliar. They raise the size of the measure by 8%, okay, and then they start charging 10% high more 10% more for this new measure, right? Well, people aren't that familiar. It doesn't make a difference if why would the Brashna say you can't raise the price, the size of the measure more than a sixth? Like, why is doing it less than the sixth permitted? You have the same concern of the merchants might raise the prices too high. All right, so what's this about a sixth? Like, why is that? Why is that a limit?
So that an eighth would be okay, or ninth would
Yeah,
be
that's
okay.
what it's implying, but logically that doesn't make sense. Like, why would you allow a sixth but not an eighth? Because the same overcharging could take place.
But that is the overcharging, right? Raising it, whatever the raise is, that's overcharging.
Exactly right. So we're concerned about that. So why would the Brisa say when you raise the size of the measure, you can raise it, but not more than the sixth? But if you raise it less than the sixth, you're still at risk for this problem for overcharging. Right. The whole point, the whole problem here is people are unfamiliar with what the new price should be. Right. It's like they do this in the in the modern food industry as well. Right. They'll just change the size of the packaging and keep charging the same price. Right. But ultimately you're paying more. You just don't realize it.
That's right.
So the same thing is like if the measure is now 8% bigger and I charge 10% more, nobody's going to notice that I've raised my prices. So it makes no
Right.
difference if the measure is twice as big and so I charge more, or the measure is 10% bigger and I charge more. Like, why is the Brisa saying you can expand the measure, but not beyond the six? But if you expand it less than the six, you still have the same problem of people's unfamiliarity leading to the potential for a price rise.
So if he expands the measure to a six, would he be allowed to raise the price of six then?
Yeah, you would, but what we're saying is don't allow the size of the measure to change because of the potential for fraud or for price for raising the price too much or raising the price at all.
So don't allow the measure to change at all then, right?
Right, that's what it should be. So that's what the Gemara says. It can't be for that reason because then you wouldn't allow the measure to change at all. Right? So what's the reason you can't raise it more than that up to a sixth you can, but beyond the sixth you can't? What's the reason? So Ela Mishum Ona. Maybe it's because that would constitute Ona, right? If the price now you're saying, okay, because the price difference is more than the six, then you get into the Ona territory. And then we do allow you to raise prices less than the sixth, right? And we don't allow you to raise prices more than the six. Okay, so because if you would if this constituted ona, then the sale would be invalid. But
So,
if that's the reason,
but
well,
if
I'm
you
a
can,
Rav.
if
Yeah.
he raises the quantity, the measure of the product, I don't know, let's say 20%. What he should be allowed to raise the price 20%, right?
So I think what it's getting at here is that don't raise the size of the measure and insist that the price remain the same because then that's undercharging by more than the six.
That's undercharging. So now you're taking the opposite tack.
Yeah.
But we're talking about overcharging here, aren't we?
Not necessarily. Ono works both ways. You can't undercharge or overcharge. If you're undercharging, then the buyer is committing ono.
Okay, so all right, enachinami. But here, if he mentions of rising, but raising the price, if he does so, I mean, if he raises the measure, can't he raise the price equally?
Yes, but it seems to me like what we're saying is you can't say a liter is now 130 centiliters, but the price remains the same. The new liter and the old liter. Because
Okay.
that would be no, that would be undercharging. The buyer would be paying too little by more than the sixth.
Uh, well, okay, but we are talking about raising a mido yoter mishdud, my time. We're talking about
Yeah, but
raising,
if you raise the measure and keep the price the same, you're effectively lowering the price.
right? That's okay. And how would it be to raise the price if you kept the measure?
No, we never said that it's never said explicitly we're talking about price raising. We're talking about uh, you know improper price setting, right? The statement is you can't raise the size of the measure too much. And I'm proposing that because that what the Gemara is saying now is that because that could, if the if the price remains the same, let's say somebody comes from out of town and he doesn't realize that you've changed the measure and he's paying the old prices for the new measure, then he's underpaying.
Okay, but the Rashbam says Umit Mishanichnas Ayoker Mokirim Yoter Michdei
All right, so
Tosefet.
you know what? Okay, so here it is. So you have an itinerant merchant comes to town, and he's selling with the old smaller measure, and he's charging the price of the old measure, and he's using the local measure. I'm sorry. So what was your question? Where does
But it seems to be the Rashbam is talking about raising the prices also. Mishnah Amidot Yokiru Mishanichnas Ayoker Mokirim Yoter Michdei Tosefet. That is charging more, the prices more than the Tosefet, than the Midah. So he's overcharging. That's why I'm not sure. That's the way I understand it. I could be wrong,
Which
but
Rosh are you looking at
yeah,
here?
Mishum Afkui Tarta, where at the end of it he says a yoke a
Yeah, that was the
multi.
Havami. That we've gone beyond that. Like that was
Oh,
the original idea was, oh, because you could lead to overcharging. And now we're saying Mishum Ona, that could lead to undercharging.
oh, okay. You're saying
Okay. But now the Gemara is going to challenge that too. V'amar Rava. But Rava said, "Kol Mishkal Ushav Minyan, anything that is sold by measure, weight, or number, afil pachos michdei ona chozer." Like then you don't even have the 1/6 limit, right? You've got, if you're selling for the wrong price, you're selling something that is has a fixed price by weight, then you can't even charge overcharge by a smaller amount than a sixth. Um, so, so if the seller doesn't know that the size of the measure changed, like it shouldn't matter that it changed by a six, even if it changed by only 10%, you still have an ona problem. So my answer is Ella Tagra. Why can't you change the size of the measure so that the merchant shouldn't the merchant shouldn't get a loss if he mistakenly uses the old measure, right? Or mistakenly charges the old price. So the Gemara says, "Seda hu Rav Cholobai." Like, okay, so we're concerned he's gonna, or we're just concerned that he shouldn't lose money, but we should also want him to make money. Zavin v'zavin tavrikre. Like if you're buying it and selling it for the same price, aren't you supposed to profit? Rav Chizda, Shmuel kra ashkach v'darish. Shmuel was basing himself on a pasuk. And the pasuk is Vashekel Esrim Gera. The shekel, this is from Yechaskel. The shekel is 20 gera. Esrim shkalim chamisha v'esrim shkalim asar v'chamisha shekel hamana yelechem. A shekel is 20 plus 25 plus 15 shekel. In other words, a total of 60 shekel. Now, what's going on here? Like, what kind of a way to measure something is that? Just say 60 shekel. So mana masan v'arbayin havu. And also, like, even if you're saying it's 60, in the end, isn't that too expensive? Because we know that the mana is 100 shekel, right? But according to this, it comes out that a mana would be 240 dinar. Sorry, a mana is 100 dinar, right? If a shekel is um and
here he
if a
says the mana is equal to 60 shekel.
right, right. Mana is 60 shekel. So then a mana would be 240 dinar, right? But we know that the mana is 100 dinar, right? Or 25 shekel. So what are you talking about, 60 shekel? And even if it's 60 shekel, what do you mean 25 plus 20 plus 15? What's that about? El Shmami Neitzlas. It's telling you three things. Shmami na amana shel hakodesh kafel. First of all, amana in the mikdash is double. Okay, now that's number one. But it still doesn't answer all the question, because then it would be 200, not 240. And it tells you that you can raise the size of the measure by up to a sixth. And how do you calculate it? As I'm sure we've covered before, do you calculate it a sixth of the original or a sixth of the final? Um, so if the original mana was 200, then the new mana could be in the mikdash. The new one could be up to 240, and that's a 60. And that's 60 shekel. So how do you get this from splitting it up into 20, 25, and 15?
40 times
Um,
45 and 6. Wait. 60. How do you get 60? Wait a second. How do you, that's a sixth of, wait a second. How do you get to 240?
because you start at 200 and you add a sixth. A sixth of Milavar is 40, a sixth of 200.
The six is
Because
40. Okay, so but how did we calculate the 240 before? Is it? It's
well, that's what we're getting to. That's how you get to 240. That's how why 240 makes sense, because the mikdash mana is actually started out as 200 and can be raised as high as 240.
right, but what is the? I'm sorry. What is the calculation between the dinar? There are 100 dinar in
In
a
a regular
mana.
mana, in a non-mikdash mana, there's 100 dinar, right? In a mikdash mana, there's 200 dinar. If you were to raise it, you could raise it up to a sixth, which would be 240 or 120 for a regular.
Right. So, but we said that this is 240. If a mana is equal to 60 shekel, then a
Yeah,
mana is 240 dinar
right.
because the shekel is 4 dinar. Is that it?
Because again,
A shekel is
distinguish between
4 dinar.
the mikdash and the marketplace.
Right. Okay. But the shekel is 4 dinar. Is that right?
A shekel is um, a shekel is 40 is 4 dinar. Yes, that's right.
Shekel is 4 dinar. Okay.
Or it would be uh, if you follow this raising of the measure. Okay, I mean that doesn't really explain to me like why do we split it into uh 15, 20, and 25. I didn't get how we got that. Maybe that wasn't really the question we were asking. The question was more about the total, and we resolved that. Rav Papa Rashmol Takin Kaila Bartlasa Kfize. Rav Papa created a new measure, 3 kfiza, and 3 kfiza apparently is 9 log. Armalay, so they said, the old one was 6 lug, right? The half Tarkov was 3 sa, which is 6 lug. So how can you create one that's 9 lug? Isn't that more than the sixth bigger? Armalay said, I'm not increasing the size of an old measure. I'm creating a new measure. So apparently he's saying that there was no, well, I mean, one way to understand this, according to Rashbam, is that there was no half Tarkov, there was no 3 lug measure at all, right? So he's not, so there was no Tarkov measure at all. 1 second.
Well, there was a Tarkov measure, and there was a
Yeah, there is, but not in his town. Apparently, they did not use Tarkovs, and therefore, when he created something that was so much bigger than the next smallest measure, it's like creating a new measure. It can't be confused. The Gemara doesn't state that, but that's the way Rashbam understands it. So anyway, what happened? They still had this dispute. So Shadri Pumpadisa, look, Rav Papa sends his argument to Pumpadisa, and they said, no, doesn't work. You're not allowed to create this new measure. Shadri Papunya V'Kabluah. He went to Papunya, and they accepted it for Karl Le Ruz Papa. They called it Papa's measure. Okay. It's not clear. Well, that there was a dispute, and should we just take the letter of the law? You can't create this new measure because elsewhere there are measures that are too similar, or you can create it because locally there are no measures that are similar. That's the argument. So there were different opinions. And it's also interesting that he engaged in rabbi shopping, right? And he's like, okay, you got upset that I can't do this, but I'll get one that says I can do this. Okay, Tana Rabban, Rabbi Sat, Otsre Peros. This is referring to people who hoard. Like you try to corner the market and buy up all the merchandise, and then you wait for the price to go up, and then you sell it. So that's bad. Umalve berivis, lending with interest, that's bad. Umaktine efa, reducing the size, of the measure, right? So basically cheating by selling smaller measures. Umafkie sharim, or if you you collude, I think this is probably referring to collusion, right? Where you conspire to cause prices to go up. Um, Elena Kosovo, all these bad things the Torah says about it, the Navi says about it. Lemar Masai Yavar Hachodesh Vinashbira Shever. When will this like month be over so we can start selling, right? When the price will go up. V'hashabos v'nichta chabar. And when will the Shemitah come and we can open up the storehouses? Lahaktin efa ulagdil shekel ulaves mosne mirma, to reduce the measure of the efa and enlarge the shekel, and to to cheat on the weighing machines. And about those people it says, God swears he will never, God will never forget their deeds. Now, what are all these? Let's look a little closely. Otzar peros kugamai. What is an otzar peros? Someone who hoards produce. Kugonman, Amar Yochanan, Kugon Shapsai otzar peros. Like this guy, Shapsai. Okay, and we don't have any more details about this guy, but he's using him as someone who is known that practiced this. Abu Shmuel must be lepere, betara harfa, katara harfa. Shmuel's father would sell his produce early in the season for the early price. Now here the assumption is that the early price, like early in the season, the prices are low, presumably because the quality isn't so good, right? You're picking the stuff before it's ripe, before it's really ready, and so the price is lower. So he would sell fairly, in the early season, he would sell early season prices. Shmuel Bere, his son, Shmuel, Mashe Pere Umazbinlu, Betarak Afla Katara Harfa. He would hold back his produce. And in the height of the season, he would sell for lower prices for the early season price. So that sounds like it's even better, right? Shalchumitam, so they sent the word from Eretz Yisrael. Tava de Abba Midbara, Midivra. The what the father did, selling early season for early season prices, was actually better. Why? By Tama, Tara de Rava Ravach. Because it influences the prices that are set for later in the season. Okay, so by trying to hold down the price of the early season market, the in-season market will go up, but not that much. Whereas Shmuel himself, even though he was selling basically at a lower price than he could have gotten, right? He was selling during the season for a lower price, but he didn't have it's not the same influence over the market prices, right? Like, sure, he's going to sell cheaper, but that's not going to cause, and perhaps probably he didn't have enough of the market to himself to cause the prices. So some people would pay him less, but the other merchants would be selling for, whatever regular prices. But what Shmuel's father did was to try to hold, since he probably had an outsized influence on the early season prices, because not that many people are selling in the early season. So by influencing the market prices, he was doing the poor more of a favor than Shmuel the son. Okay, Amarav
He was doing a
says,
favor to the poor at that time by giving them the opportunity to buy things at a lower price, but the prices went up during the season, right?
Right, but what it's saying is that Shmuel's father, by being able to exercise influence over the marketplace in the early season, that also influenced how the prices were set for mid-season. So he was leveraging his power over the early market because presumably not so many people were selling in the early season. So he had an outsized influence over the pricing of the early season market, and that in turn affected the pricing of the mid-season market.
Oh,
Because
so if there was fewer supply and demand, if there were fewer products available, other people might charge more at the early season, and he charged less, and he had
well, I
more.
think the assumption seems to be that there wasn't a lot of competition. Nobody wanted to sell there. Maybe they didn't have, or maybe he was the only one, or there were fewer people that had stuff to sell in the early season, or they didn't want to because later in the season they'll get better prices. Um, so because it was a smaller marketplace and less competition, he had an outsized influence over the market pricing in the early season, and that in turn influenced the market pricing in mid-season. Nobody would dare to go like so much higher than the early season pricing. So he basically leveraged his influence over the marketplace by selling early in the season, and that affected the price for the whole season in a downward way. It held down the price in the whole season. So
Right.
that's why they're saying that he was doing people more of a favor than Shmuel, who sold for a low price during the season. But because everybody's selling then, so a few people might have taken advantage of Shmuel's wares, rather Shmuel's prices, but the marketplace in general would not have been moved.
All right.
Amarav, Osa Adam is Kabo Osar. An individual person, you can make your own, you can hoard your own stuff, right? You can stockpile your own produce because you don't have much of an influence on the marketplace, right? It's not gonna just because you have more and you can sell for and you can hold back until you get a higher price, that doesn't affect the market pricing. Same idea. Tanya we have a similar support for this. Ein otzrin peros devarim sheish b'hem chai nefesh. You can't hoard staples, right? Things that people really need. Kagon, yenos, shmanim, uslatos, like wine, oil, and flour. And we'll investigate each of these in a minute. Aval tavlin, kamin, upilpulin, but spices like cumin and pepper, paprika, whatever, mutar, you can hoard those. And when is that? You're talking about when you're buying from the marketplace. But hoarding your own stuff, right, for your own use, you can certainly hoard, right? You want to keep as much flour as you can um, in your own kitchen, then you can do that, right? That's not a question of manipulating the market price. And which a lot of lots are Paris, Eretz Yisrael, Gimel Shanim, and you can hoard in Eretz Yisrael for 3 years, the following 3 years, Erev Shvis, Ushvis, Umotzei Shvis, because you're not going to be able to harvest for those 3 years. So, or not harvest, you're not going to be able to harvest during Shvi, so it's okay to store up for 3 years then. Ubishnei batzaras, but if there's a bit of a famine, afilu kav haruvin lo yatzer, you can't hoard more than even one kav of carobs more than you need. Mipnei shemachnis me'era basharim, because um, if there's less food available in the marketplace, then if there's less food available in the marketplace, then that holding back even a little bit from the marketplace does affect the prices.
Are you saying Yosef was hoarding food, right? Wasn't he storing food in the time he was storing
Oh, in
food
Egypt? Yosef in
in
Egypt, you
Egypt?
mean? Ah,
Yes.
well, yeah, that was a famine. Um, But well, so it's interesting. Yosef actually did manipulate the market, um, quite clearly. Like that was the whole point, right? Like once he had control of the marketplace, he was in a position to dictate how the marketplace behaved, right? How people behaved. So
Right.
yeah, well, so first of all, they were Egyptians, and second of all, it was
No, but
before
not only
before.
Egyptians, his not only for the Egyptians, but for anyone in the surrounding area, right?
Yeah, right. But I mean, for non-Jews. And also it's like before Kabbalah Satorah. So, um, but I think it's clear that that's exactly what he was doing. Rabbi Yossi said to his servant, "Hok atzarli peresh shloshayim. Go and buy up 3 years worth of stuff. I need flour, as much flour as I'm going to need for 3 years. Erev Shvis, Shvis, Motzei Shvis, because the Shemitah year is coming. Like buy it now." So this just supports that those 3 years are an exception. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ein Mosin Paris Eretz Yisrael. You can't export produce from Eretz Yisrael. If dvarim sheish b'hem chay nefesh, if they're staples, like wine, oil, and flour. Rabbi Yehuda mebasera matir b'yayin. Rabbi Yehuda allowed with wine, mipnei shemamait esatifla, because wine. Maybe people needed wine to drink, but it also made them drunk. And so he wanted to reduce. He was fine with exporting wine from Eretz Yisrael. Like the non-Jews have the wine. Let them get drunk. Just like you can't export from Israel outside. And also, not even Syria, which had more of a questionable status, right? It was kind of like Eretz Yisrael in some cases. It was conquered by David HaMelech. You can't export to Syria for Rabbi Matir, but Rabbi says you can if it's hiparchia, if it's a neighboring, like a bordering area. Okay, so presumably, you want to facilitate trade between local, like you could send your fruit to you live up in the Golan, you send your produce down to Yerushalayim, or to Tel Aviv. It's there's transportation costs, etc. Whereas you could just deal with the Druze, just across the border. Then presumably that facilitates you can buy from them as well. So if it's really local, then Rabbi didn't have a problem with this cross-border trade. You can't even make your living with things that are staples. But they said about Rabbi Lazar, he didn't listen to this. He made his living by selling wine and oil. Why? B'yayin, several like Rabbi Yehuda. About wine, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, that is like that if there's less wine available, then it's better. Like people won't get so drunk. So similarly, if the prices for wine go up, then people will buy less wine. And b'shemen, what about oil? There was plenty of oil, so he could charge. He could make a nice profit on oil, presumably not ona, right? But he could make a nice profit on oil, and people could go plenty of other places. There was plenty of oil to be found, so his practice did not affect the market price. Okay, I'll stop here for today and pick it up here tomorrow.
So wine prices would go up if there's less wine.
Right. Or if he raised his prices again within the permissible, if he was making more money from wine, that means less wine was being sold, and that is a positive social good. It's like cigarette taxes, right? Like you raise the price and people will smoke less. So it's fine for the government to make lots of money on that.
Uh-huh. And this gets into the well, I don't know. I'm still thinking about that. They're raising the market
Yeah.
and affecting the price. Earlier, we said it could be raising or lowering the price. In any case, it shouldn't be permitted less than this.
Yeah. Obviously the 1/6 limit still applies. Yeah.
It still applies here as well. But
yeah, presumably, yeah.
But we were saying before that even less than a sixth might be a problem.
Right. And so certain circumstances, like staples, you want people to be able to buy what they need to live. Then there is. I mean, the Gemara is not clear. Like, can you make a profit from it? Like, you have to be able to make a profit from it, as we said before. Otherwise, nobody will do it, right? But like, don't. I'm not sure how to put it exactly, but what it's implying is. When you're selling staples, you don't have the same flexibility in pricing. You should sell it for the minimum profit that you can, or the minimum that makes it reasonable, but don't try to get rich off of selling staples.
What was the conclusion of that other earlier discussion where he shouldn't raise the quantity, the measure more than a sixth?
Yeah.
What was the conclusion? I mean, he shouldn't raise it, and he also shouldn't lower it because of Ona. What ultimately was the maskana there?
Well, the Maskana, I mean, the Maskana was a foregone conclusion. It was the Brisa said you can't raise the measure more than the sixth, and we just tried to figure out how does that work and what measures can you create or not create.
No, but the question is, maybe they shouldn't even been able to raise it a tenth or an eighth or whatever.
Oh, no, no. What we said was if the reason is that you're afraid that the merchants will take advantage of confusion, right? Then like why would you say six? So it turns out that that is not the concern. The concern is people have their little calculators, right? And they'll know that if you raise the size of the measure by whatever, 10%, then you can raise the price by 10%, but no more. People will know that. So that is not a concern. That was our conclusion. But so the reason that so it's still the case that you can't raise the size of the measure by more than the sixth, but not because we're afraid people are going to get confused about the prices, right? Um, that's not the reason for the concern.
And the reason for the concern is what then?
So what did we end up with?
That's what my
Okay, I already forgot. Um, so that the merchants won't mistakenly get cheated. Let's say if you have a um, um, so to prevent, so in other words, we're assuming that the consumers are savvy, but the merchant might get mixed up, right? The merchant might incorrectly. Oh no, we rejected that also. Um, so we based it basically. Shmuel based it on this pasuk about that about the how much is the shekel, and it works out that you could assume the shekel is 240
right,
dinar if you allow the changing of the measure up to a sixth.
right. Okay, so that was the
And so that's the
calculation. I
basis
don't
of
know.
it. So it's not a logical or a marketplace concern, or not an explicit one. Anyway, it's indicated by this pasuk that the mikdash shekel could go up to 240. That would be a raise of 1/6.
So you're answering it by a pasuk, but we leave all these questions. It seems to me we leave questions whether the buyer is cheated,
Yeah,
the
we
seller is
and
cheated, and so
right.
we bring a pasuk that okay, you can raise it by a six, but it still leaves me hanging that what's
Well, I
really
think
going
I think what the
on.
Gemara is saying is these aren't really concerns because everybody has a calculator. Right? You could, if it's because of these concerns, you wouldn't be allowed to change the measure at all. But the fact
Right,
is, we do allow the
exactly.
measure to change because we assume that the consumer is educated and savvy. He's not going to overpay out of ignorance. I think our modern experience is like, what are you going to do? Cornflakes used to be, 500 grams in a box, and now it's 375, and they're charging me the same. What are you going to do, right? You're going to buy it anyway, or you'll buy less or whatever.
So okay, so the consumer then has his calculator. He still knows that there's a difference. He knows that the toothpaste is now
Effectively more expensive, right?
right.
Okay, but he decides to buy it anyway.
Okay.
But it's not because not because he can be upset about the price rise, but at least he's not paying more out of ignorance. That's
Uh-huh.
the assumption. That seems to be the assumption.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
is that true? I don't know.
It still leaves me
Yeah, like these should be concerns,
unsatisfied a
right?
little
You
bit.
would think, yeah, I know, like, yeah, these should be concerns, right? But in at least in this situation, the Gemara is not motivated by those concerns.
All right.
Okay. Have a good day. See you
Good
tomorrow.
day.